Hello everybody, welcome to the channel, to my next video where I talk about different vehicles and tanks in Armored Warfare Tank Tree. Today my focus will be on M48 Patton, American main battle tank that you can find in Tier 2 of Sophie Wilfeld dealership. As I mentioned in my previous videos, in Armored Warfare you don't have a classic selection of countries, but rather these imaginary dealerships where you acquire your tanks and vehicles from. And Sophie Wilfeld dealership is a combination between some American and some German tanks. As I mentioned, M48 Patton sits on Tier 2 of this dealership, and later on you can develop from this point different variants of M60, the follow-up of M48, and then later on different variants of M1A1 Abrams tank. Regarding M48 itself, it had a relatively successful lifespan starting in 1950s when it was introduced into service, and even today some of the countries are still having active M48s in their military. For example, Turkey still has around 700 of M48s, Greece around 400, and Taiwan around 500 of these tanks in their service. Also, it saw combat in multiple theaters around the globe, starting from Arab-Israeli conflicts in Middle East, Vietnam War, Indo-Pakistan War, and some conflicts in Africa. M48 has 4 crew members. It has also a relatively decent armor of around 150 millimeters on the turret up front and around 110 millimeters on the hull up front. The gun is not great, I would say, only 90 millimeters. On later variants of M48 Patton, specifically variant A5, the cannon was upgraded to 105 millimeters, but in the game, in Armored Warfare, you need to deal with 90 millimeter cannon. But enough of the technical points, let's see some of the action with M48. As I mentioned a little bit earlier, M48 Patton is a Tier 2 main battle tank, and in the game itself you will face mostly enemy vehicles and tanks from Tier 2 and Tier 3, and sometimes, but very rarely from my experience, you'll also face vehicles and tanks from Tier 4. One of the main drawbacks of Armored Warfare as a whole, it doesn't have a large player base like World of Tanks or War Thunder, so instead of playing full 15 versus 15 random battles, you will often find yourself playing 10 versus 10 battles, or in some cases when servers can't find enough active players, you will also be playing 7 versus 7 battles that are of course much less fun than full 15 versus 15 battles. M48 has a relatively decent speed of 55 kilometers per hour, considering its weight of 40 tons. And when I compare it with the T-55, the Soviet main battle tank of the same era, I must say that T-55 wins by a narrow margin in this department, having a little bit better maneuverability and off-road capabilities than M48. M48 also has a relatively large silhouette. It's a relatively big tank, so you will struggle to keep it hidden on the battlefield from the enemy. And even more than in T-55, you'll have to rely on your teammates and your colleagues to scout ahead for possible ambushes. The armor on M48 Patton is overall not so great. It features around 150 millimeters up front on the turret and around 110 millimeters of armor up front on the hull. And most of the enemy vehicles, especially if they are Tiers 3 and Tiers 4, will not have a hard time penetrating you. Even some vehicles from Tier 2, especially if we are talking about tank destroyers, will have an easy time penetrating M48. One of the main aspects on each and every vehicle and tank in this game is of course their gun and their armament, and I must say that in this department M48 also doesn't excel. It has a 90mm main gun, but not so great damage and penetration if I compare it to Soviet T-55. You will of course have no problem penetrating infantry fighting vehicles and tank destroyers of Tiers 2 and 3, but encountering main battle tanks you struggle even in Tier 2 to penetrate these main battle tanks. One good thing going on for M48, it's like some of the American tanks, it can use high explosive plastic rounds, so-called HESH rounds, that are specially designed to penetrate and do damage on the spaced armor, and mostly on the spaced armor of Soviet tanks, so encountering Soviet tanks like T-55 and later T-64 and similar variants. You will do most damage to them using these high explosive plastic or HESH rounds. One more thing where a gun of M48 is better than its Soviet counterpart, it's a gun depression. It features a gun depression of about 9 degrees, almost as double as T-55, so you can use it relatively good for this peek and boom tactics when you peek behind a sloped hill, because you can lower the cannon of M48 for about 9 degrees. All in all, I must say that I didn't really enjoy playing M48 Patton. For me, it was just an obstacle on Tier 2 to go to more powerful American tanks later, like different variants of M60 and later different variants of Abrams tanks. When I compare it directly to its main opponent, the T-55, I think T-55 wins in every department, from the gun damage and gun penetration to better armor, better maneuverability and better mobility on the battlefield. I hope you enjoyed this short overview of M48 Patton. If you did, please leave a like and consider subscribing. I will try to do these kind of short overviews for each and every vehicle in Armored Warfare. Until that next time, I wish you all a pleasant day and goodbye.